about this. But I find it's so difficult to talk to Canadians about the fact that if you require an ambulance and you provide your health card, you don't have, that ambulance doesn't know if you're allergic to anything. Mr. Speaker, I think I'm running out of time as question period will start, but I would like to continue this after question period because this is a crucial moment for our healthcare system in Canada.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary will have 2 minutes coming to her upon her return and resumption of debate. Now we'll go to statements by members. Déclaration de député. The Honourable Member for Elgin, Middlesex, London.
Mr. Speaker, if you look up the term exemplary service in Elgin County, you will find the name and face of Ken Monteith. Ken lived nearly all of his life on the family farm in Middlemarch. He served as a councillor, deputy reeve, warden, and member of Parliament for Elgin, Norfolk. He was the chairman of the Progressive Conservative Party's National Agricultural Caucus and sat on the Agricultural Standing Committee on Parliament Hill. Ken dedicated his life to his community. He was chairman of the board for the St. Thomas Elgin General Hospital, director of Ridgetown College, chair of the 1985 International Plowing Match, and co-chair of the Elgin St. Thomas United Way campaign. He was recipient of the Queen's Medal at the West Take Alumnus of Honor Awards and the Outstanding Service Award from Ontario Agricultural College. He was also inducted into the Elgin County Agricultural Hall of Fame in 2015. Kenneth Ernest Monteith passed away on February the 3rd. To his wife, Luella, children, Ken, Paul, and Janet, and their families, from the people of Elgin, Middlesex, London, thank you for sharing Ken with all of us. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
So what I'll do is I'll go to Mr. We seem to be having an issue with interpretation, so we're going to check into it. And if the honourable member wants, maybe we can do it again, and this way. We're okay? You're okay? Okay. The honourable member for Nepean.
Mr. Speaker, it is with pain and anguish that I state the Ram Mandir, a Hindu temple in Mississauga, has become the latest target of hate crime. In recent times, other Hindu temples across Canada have been targets of hate crimes by anti-Hindu and anti-India groups. These groups first joined hands on social media, targeting Hindu Canadians and starting the trend of Hinduphobia. Now, they have moved on to physical attacks on Hindu temples. There are reports that individual Hindu Canadians also being targeted. As I have said before, Canada needs to take the issue seriously and address the growing Hinduphobia. As Canadians, we practice, celebrate, and share our many different religious faiths and heritage peacefully, and let us all pledge to continue to do so. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Aurora, Oak Ridges, Richmond Hill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I am both honoured and saddened to still be speaking about the tragic situation in Iran. It's been almost 6 months since Mahsa Amini was killed while in the custody of the morality police, and it's been 44 years since this authoritarian government took over in this country. Today, countless women and young people continue to risk their lives protesting the gross human rights violations perpetrated by the regime. Even in the face of threats of execution and imprisonment, the Iranian people continue to show their resilience and solidarity with the ideals of human rights, liberal democracy, and freedom that we in Canada are so privileged to enjoy. This morning, I stood to present a petition signed and presented to me by Iranian Canadians in my riding, calling on the government to continue to implement the sanctions we have in place on the IRGC and its officials. My thanks to Shelley, Marjan, and Lily, who spearheaded the petition and have been supporting and working tirelessly with the community and me to ensure that this work continues. I presented these petitions with members from other parties to show that this issue is not a partisan one. I want to thank my colleagues, the Honourable Conservative member from Elgin, Middlesex, London, and the Green Party from Saanich Gulf Islands, who stood and presented the petitions with me. And I also want to acknowledge the support of the NDP, the member from Port Moody Coquitlam, and the Bloc, the member from Shefford, for their support. Unfortunately, the women were so frightened to sign these petitions that they weren't certified, and not all of us could stand, Mr. Speaker. I just want to point out to all Iranian Canadians, your government and your elected representatives from all parties stand with you and the Iranian people. Zindagi Azidi. Thank you.
L'honorable député. The honourable member for Abitibi, Bay James, Nunavik, AU. Mr. Speaker, Hooked on School Days is from February 13 to 17 this year. The event honors those who support our young people. On the Hooked on School Days website, we can see that by recognizing their essential contribution to the motivation, resilience, and self-confidence of each young person, we salute their commitment to making staying in school a priority. When this is combined with congratulations, guidance, encouragement, explanations, listening, and support, young people and Quebec society as a whole are the better for it. The more we instill this feeling of confidence and appreciation, the better the odds that every single young person realizes their potential and finds within themselves the resources to progress in a direction that matches their passions and interests. I'm confident that staying in school will ensure a great future in Abitibi, Bay James, Nunavik, AU. Thank you. The honourable member for Sherbrooke. Mr. Speaker, yesterday was Canadian Agriculture Day. Let's celebrate our food and especially those who produce it. In Quaticook, in the Eastern Townships, the Maureen Farm won the AgroPoor Award for the best milk in Quebec for the third year in a row. It's thanks to farmers like Régent Morin and Véronique Lévesque, who pamper their animals every day from 5:30 a.m. to 11 p.m., that we have such delicious local products. The hard work of our producers from 190,000 farms all across the country gives Canada an enviable reputation around the world for food quality, innovation in the agriculture and agri-food sector, and sustainable development. Through the work of my colleague, the Minister of Agriculture and Agri-Food, our government will continue to support our farmers by implementing several measures, including a new Canadian Partnership for Sustainable Agriculture, investing in innovation and clean technologies, and strongly supporting supply management. Member for Battle River, Crowfoot.
Mr. Speaker, it is with a heavy heart that I rise today on behalf of the people of Battle River, Crowfoot, and all Canadians to express my deep sadness at the passing of RCMP Staff Sergeant Bruce Holliday. Staff Sergeant Holliday was not only an incredibly dedicated police officer, but was an extraordinary human being and an involved member of the community. He worked tirelessly to break down the barriers within the communities he served and built trust between the residents of East Central Alberta and the RCMP. He played an essential role in building community wellness programming and was an inspiration to so many. Stettler, Bashaw, and the many other communities he served benefited greatly from his leadership. His care and dedication transformed many lives and not only made our region safer, but truly better. From his work while in uniform to his passion for his family and the community. I would ask all members to join Danielle and I in sending their condolences to Bruce's wife, Lydia, and kids, Kayla and Claire, as well as his loved ones, friends, colleagues. May God grant you all peace during this difficult time.
The honourable member for Thunder Bay, Rainy River.
It's coming up 1 year since Russia launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Tens of thousands of soldiers have died. Ukrainian civilians have been targeted, left in the cold, tortured, and murdered. And the big question is, why? Russian leaders like Putin and Lavrov standing on marble floors, wearing their ties and their shiny shoes, spout endless lies in an attempt to legitimize the killings. But the only people buying into these lies are gullible fools or those who profit from the Russians. The war goes on because it's not the rich Russian leaders or their families who are dying in the snowbanks of Ukraine. Those who perpetrated the war will be brought to justice, and I hope when that happens, it is those who wore the ties and the shiny shoes who will particularly get the harsh justice. Slava Ukraini!
The honourable member for Mississauga, Erin Mills.
Mr. Speaker, in December of 1995, the Honourable Dr. Jean Augustine presented a motion in the House of Commons which officially recognized February as Black History Month in Canada. Today, I'd like to highlight just a few of the many Black Canadians that have positively shaped Canada in my community of Mississauga, Erin Mills. Oscar Peterson was one of the greatest jazz pianists of all time, called Erin Mills home for many years. Nicknamed the man with four hands, Peterson left a prolific musical legacy, and just last August was the first Black Canadian on a circulation coin. Michael Pinball Clemens and Diane Clemens, co-founders of the Pinball Clemens Foundation in Mississauga, are a staple in our community where they give back to marginalized and racialized Black youth through mentorship programs, through scholarships and bursaries. Mr. Speaker, let's all take the time to learn about and honor the legacies of Black Canadians and recommit to celebrating the many contributions that they have made to our communities. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Selkirk, Interlake, Eastman.
February 24th marks 365 days since Vladimir Putin gave the order for his Russian war machine to further invade Ukraine. 365 days of Putin's barbarians committing war crimes and atrocities against innocent Ukrainians. 365 days of Russian soldiers and mercenaries raping Ukrainian women and children, pillaging homes and villages in Ukraine. And 365 days of Russian missiles and drones indiscriminately bombing Ukrainian hospitals, schools, apartment buildings, daycares, and energy infrastructure. Over those 365 days, we have witnessed Ukrainians fighting back valiantly. For 365 days, they have bravely stood up to Moscow by destroying Russian tanks, aircraft, missiles, drones, and liberating Ukrainian communities. And for 365 days, Canada and our allies have stood with Ukraine, supplying them with weapons, humanitarian aid, and financial assistance. Over the past years, Conservatives said Canada can and must do more by sending our soon-to-be-retired LAVs, Canadian-made sniper rifles, and Rule 3 hospitals to Ukraine. We must stand with Ukraine so they can defeat Putin's war machine to ensure peace and security for all. Slava Ukraini.
The Honourable Member for Kitchener South Hespeler.
Mr. Speaker, on the heels of International Day of Women and Girls in Science, I rise to welcome a group of women stem cell and regenerative medicine researchers to Ottawa. These women join us from labs and companies across the country and are part of Canada's Stem Cell Network, a not-for-profit organization that supports regenerative medicine research, training next-generation talent, and making sure this game-changing research can be used and understood by all. The existence of stem cells was first proven by two Canadians in the 1960s, and since that time, stem cells have been powering the field of regenerative medicine, which focuses on replacing, repairing, or regenerating cells, tissues, and organs. Canada is a world leader in this field, and it is researchers like the women here with us today who are unlocking leading-edge treatments for diseases such as diabetes, muscular dystrophy, Parkinson's, cardiovascular disease, and many, many more. I congratulate and thank the women who are here today and hope that colleagues will meet with them.
Member for Langley Aldergrove.
Big shout out to the Langley RCMP. I met with them one day last month for their early morning briefing to hear their stories and for a ride along with one of their officers to learn firsthand about community policing. I met brave and dedicated officers who keep us safe, but who are also deeply concerned about their own safety. They were very encouraged to hear that Conservatives are committed to bail reform. After the tragic shooting death of OPP officer Greg Pershala, who was gunned down by a man out on bail after repeated firearms-related offenses. This young officer should have gone home to his family that evening. He died in hospital. The Liberals' catch and release bail program is a failed experiment. Conservatives are committed to fixing what is broken, supporting our men and women in uniform, and standing up for law-abiding citizens.
I want to remind the honourable members that Standing Order 31's people are telling us about what's going on in their ridings, and I think we owe it to them to listen. So I just want to remind them, because the discussion, it's nice to see people talking to each other, but it's starting to rise a little bit, and we want to make sure that we hear every word. The honourable member for Niagara Falls.
Speaker, after 8 years of this Liberal Prime Minister, Canadians are out of money and they can't afford to eat, heat, or house themselves. In fact, a recent StatsCan report found that a quarter of Canadians are not able to cover an unexpected expense of $500. Yet, this Liberal government continues to pile on new taxes, hike up existing taxes, and double down on their wasteful spending, which fuels high inflation and drives up the cost of everything. This April 1st, taxes on Canadian-made wines, beers, and spirits is going up 6.3%, and gas prices are set to rise 14 cents a litre. The Liberals want to triple the carbon tax. They call it an environmental plan, but it has done nothing to reduce emissions. It's simply another Liberal tax that steals hard-earned money from Canadians' pockets and gives it to this government. Canadians are suffering, and they need our help, not more Liberal tax increases. Speaker, Canadians can count on Conservatives to deliver to them the hope they need. They can count on us so they can keep the heat on and take the tax off.
The Honourable Member for Saint-Léonard-Saint-Michel. Mr. Speaker, in this Black History Month, let's continue to honour the heritage and contributions of Black communities in Canada. I'd like to take this opportunity to highlight the invaluable work accomplished by the various organizations led by members of the Black communities in Saint-Léonard and Saint-Michel, including the Haiti Canada Quebec Association for Aid to the Disadvantaged, the La Saline Centre, the Creole Theatre Company, and Haiti House, which just celebrated its 50th anniversary. All these organizations are dedicated heart and soul to the reception, education, integration, and prosperity of immigrant families in Quebec. I'd also like to highlight the interventions of Haiti House, which are based on a civics approach that empowers its participants to speak out and actively participate in the community. This unique approach promotes the empowerment and development of each person affected by their work. Long live Haiti House, and happy Black History Month. Thank you. Member for Hamilton Centre.
Mr. Speaker, as we gather in our communities to celebrate Black History Month, I proudly rise today as a past recipient and past co-chair to recognize the current board members, volunteers, and community sponsors of the J.C. Holland Awards, hosted annually by the Hamilton Black History Council. Co-founded in 1996 by Marlene Thomas and Evelyn Myrie and hosted alongside various community groups and local sponsors, this celebration is named in the spirit of the Reverend J.C. Holland, who was the first African Canadian to be named Citizen of the Year in any community in Canada. A special thanks to this year's council members, Marlene Thomas, Doreen Johnson, Jeff Holland, Shaza Stiller, Sherry Warner-Richard, Michael Highgate, Nicole Virgin, Michelle Schifferin, and Terry Bedminster, the J.C. Holland Awards event chair. Congratulations to all this year's incredible J.C. Holland Award nominees and selected winners. Thank you for your contribution to the community. Thank you for your contribution to the City of Hamilton and indeed all of Canada.
The Honourable Member for Saint-Hyacinthe-Bagotte. Mr. Speaker, on these aerospace days on the Hill, I'd like to recall the words of the late Jean Lapierre. Aerospace is to Quebec what auto is to Ontario. A true pillar of our economic nationalism, the vitality of this cutting-edge industry makes us shine on the international scene. Aerospace is a strategic and fundamental sector. Greater Montreal is the third largest aerospace hub in the world after Seattle and Toulouse. Such a jewel of research and development must be supported by a large-scale, sustainable, and consistent policy. Any country fortunate enough to be home to this kind of industry has that type of policy, except Canada. So in the short term, Ottawa should take advantage of the next budget year to correct their ineffective and misnamed luxury tax, criticized by both businesses and unions, which is putting us at a terrible disadvantage to our competitors. Long live aerospace, a homegrown jewel. The honourable member for Stormont Dundas, South Glengarry.
I rise today to wish Ethics Commissioner Mario Dion a healthy and restful retirement. After 8 years, he's sadly become one of the busiest people in all of Ottawa under these Liberals. Just this week, another Liberal guilty of ethics violations, and he joins a growing list of ethically challenged Liberals. The former Minister of Finance, guilty. The Minister of Infrastructure, guilty. Minister of Trade, guilty. And the Prime Minister himself, guilty and guilty. Mr. Dion said it best about these continued Liberal scandals, quote, "The act has been there for 17 years, for God's sakes," unquote. To the next Ethics Commissioner, I offer this advice. Bring some Red Bull. You'll need the energy to keep up. After 8 years, Canadians are tired of the scandals. Tired of seeing Liberal insiders get ahead as they fall behind. But there is hope, Mr. Speaker. If the Prime Minister won't hold his team to account for their failings, it is not to worry. They can step aside. Conservatives on this side are united and ready to lead and clean up their messes.
The honourable member for York Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, today I'd like to welcome the members of the Aerospace Industries Association of Canada who are joining us to mark Aerospace on the Hill. The aerospace sector represents a vital part of Canada's economy. In 2021, it represented over $24 billion in GDP and over 200,000 high-quality jobs for Canadians. It's a sector of growth and innovation. My riding of York Centre is home to a proud aerospace history, from the early days of de Havilland, Canada, almost 100 years ago, to CFB Downsview. We've seen planes big and small, and we built them, including the iconic Beaver, Twin Otter, and Dash 8. We now call home to Centennial College's Aerospace Campus, the University of Toronto's Institute for Aerospace Studies, and the Downsview Aerospace Innovation and Research Hub. Mr. Speaker, as co-chair of the Aerospace Caucus, we celebrate this sector that provides countless growth opportunities as we transition to the next generation of sustainable aviation, aerospace excellence, and innovation. Thank you. Let's thank them for all they do.
Oral questions, question orale. The honourable member for Regina Capel.
8 years of inflationary deficits fueled by Liberal waste and corruption have caused incredible hardship for Canadians. To fight that Liberal inflation, the Bank of Canada has massively hiked interest rates. Higher interest rates mean higher mortgage payments, meaning you have to pay more to the bank just to live in the house you already own. In fact, the average mortgage payment for a typical home in Canada has soared to over $3,000 a month. Will the Prime Minister take responsibility and admit that it was his waste and corruption that is causing this cost of living crisis, or will he get out of the way and let Conservatives fix his mess?
The Honourable Minister for Housing.
One of the things that we recognize is that Canadians need help, and we've delivered the Canada Housing Benefit, which is already investing close to $2,500 on average for vulnerable renters across the country. On top of that, we introduced a one-time $500 top-up to go to almost 2 million renters. And what did the party opposite do despite the rhetoric? Not only did they vote against it, in the fall they played procedural games in this House to delay much-needed rental supplements to almost 2 million Canadians.
The honourable member for Regina Capel.
Well, Mr. Speaker, Liberals would love to fool you into thinking that all that spending actually went to Canadians, but in fact, they were stopping and helping their friends and insiders all along the way. This Liberal law-breaking means that while Canadians are struggling, Liberal insiders have never had it so good. While 20% of Canadians are skipping meals, the Trade Minister gave a $23,000 contract to her best friend. While the rent on a typical apartment has soared to over $2,000 a month, the Housing Minister gave $93,000 to his staff's family's PR firm. After 8 years of breaking ethics laws, are there any Liberals who will hold their political masters to account, or is helping their friends and insiders why they got into politics in the first place?
The Honourable Government House Leader.
A lot of things have changed since the Conservatives were in power. One of them is Canada's unemployment rate, which under their watch was 7%. It is now 5%. The number of people who are living in poverty is now 2.7 million less, Mr. Speaker. And and when you look at our record on childcare, the leader of the opposition, Mr. Speaker, actually said at the time that he was proud that he canceled the childcare agreement that was supposed to have happened, and it was killed when he came into power. Mr. Speaker, instead we delivered that. We're delivering real help to Canadians across the country.
The member for Regina Capel
gave wage subsidies to profitable businesses who turned around and gave their CEOs bonuses. They let fraudsters and scam artists keep the CERB money that they stole. And now Liberals have been found guilty of breaking ethics laws 6 times. The Prime Minister's own law-breaking is so bad that the Ethics Commissioner has had to call him out, saying he didn't think anybody would have imagined a situation where the Prime Minister himself would be found breaking the law. Quote, "It's a funny situation to be in." I don't think he meant ha-ha funny. It's not funny to make Canadians struggle while Liberal friends and insiders get rich. Why is treating taxpayers' money with respect never the lessons these Liberals learn?
The Honourable Minister for Innovation.
You know what Canadians are tired about? They're tired about these Conservatives talking down our economy, Mr. Speaker, and talking down Canada. Mr. Speaker, in terms of good news, let's celebrate. This morning I was just celebrating Project Arrow, Mr. Speaker, the first 100% Canadian-built electric vehicle. That's the type of thing we're capable in Canada. It's about innovation, it's about leadership, it's about bringing Canadian up as opposed to bringing Canadian down, as they do every day.
The Honourable Member for Charlesbourg-Haut-Saint-Charles. Mr. Speaker, the complaints against this Liberal government concerning Bill C-5 are piling up, and for good reason. Quebec's Minister of Justice, Simon Jolin Barrette, tabled a motion in the National Assembly of Quebec that all MNAs supported. The motion calls on the centralizing Bloc Québécois and Liberal government to amend Bill C-5 to make the offence of sexual assault inadmissible for imprisonment in the community. And this is the situation because of the Bloc's complicity and collusion. So do they really want to protect people, or do they prioritize the comfort of criminals? The Honourable Minister of Justice. Mr. Speaker, our government has taken action so that victims of sexual assault are treated with dignity and respect. We have produced a lot of legislation, such as C3 and C51, which made substantial amendments to the criminal code in order to protect victims. These are among some of the most progressive laws in the world, Mr. Speaker. We have also invested in programs which help and support victims of sexual assault. Mr. Speaker, they are our priority. We will continue to support sexual assault victims. The Honourable Member for Charlesbourg-Haut-Saint-Charles. Mr. Speaker, the Minister thinks all he does is good. Yesterday, the media reported on the case of Sobi Akra, who pled guilty in January 2022 to sexually assaulting 8 women between 2017 and 2018. Bill C-5 is the brilliant idea of the Prime Minister with the complicity of the Bloc Québécois, and it makes it possible for this criminal we heard about to serve his sentence in the comfort of his own home. The Prime Minister claims to stand up for the best interests of Quebecers, but C-5 is clearly very problematic. Is the minister ready to fix C-5? It's necessary in order to help women. The Honourable Minister. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As Attorney General, it would be inappropriate for me to comment on a hearing which could be challenged, but also where a final ruling decision has not yet been given. So I won't go there, Mr. Speaker, but here's what I can say. I can say to Canadians that the goal of C-5 was to tackle systemic racism, which Black and Indigenous Canadians in the justice system experience. The Honourable Member for La Prairie. Mr. Speaker, on today's episode of the West Island Story, the Liberals are going up in flames. Each and every day, we find out about another Liberal MP from Quebec opposing the modernization of the Official Languages Act. It's even spreading to the cabinet. What started out as a smoke and mirror show has turned into a raging fire. Mr. Speaker, the suspense is at an all-time high. Will there be a free vote on Bill C-13, or will all Liberals have to vote the same way? And if they do all vote together, will they vote for or against, Mr. Speaker? The Honourable Minister of Official Languages. Mr. Speaker, I'm going to be very clear. Our position has not changed. We will do everything to protect and promote French everywhere in Canada, including in Quebec. We will also protect all official language minority communities. And I'm following this work very closely. Mr. Speaker, our bill will ensure that the Official Languages Commissioner will have strengthened powers so that federally regulated businesses in Quebec and outside Quebec in Francophone areas, in these businesses, employees will be able to work in French and Canadians will be able to be served in French. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Member for La Prairie. Mr. Speaker, the actors of the West Island Story show are coming up with the most ridiculous lines. The member for Westmount says, Canada is an English-speaking country. The member for Saint Laurent, in between 2 trips to Greece, says, there is no decline of French in Quebec. The member for Mount Royal says, I can't support Bill C-13 if it contains certain Conservative and Bloc amendments. Mr. Speaker, these are Liberal government members. Are they going to vote for the Liberal government bill? The Honourable Minister of Canadian Heritage. Well, I don't know what he's concerned about, Mr. Speaker, because the Bloc is going to vote against it. The Bloc is going to vote against a bill that will strengthen French in Quebec and everywhere in Canada. The bill will give the Official Languages Commissioner more powers. In fact, the Bloc Québécois Conservative Coalition, Mr. Speaker, is against this bill. We are standing up to promote and defend French everywhere in Canada.
Everyone in our country should be able to find a job that pays the bills, a home that's in their budget, and build a good life for themselves and their family. But sadly, that is not the case.
I'm just going to ask the Honourable Member to maybe just wait a moment, and I'm going to ask everyone just to calm down a bit. I'm having a hard time hearing the question, and we want to hear the answer, of course, so I'm going to ask everybody to just take a deep breath and relax a bit. The Honourable Member for Burnaby South from the top, please.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Every Canadian should be able to find a job that pays the bills, find a home that's in their budget, and build a good life for themselves and their families. The reality is that is not the case. The cost of living continues to rise and paychecks aren't keeping up. And when times are tough, that's when the government needs to step up. And it's tough right now for people, particularly with their rent. We're seeing the rents rise across the country. In my riding in Burnaby, rents have gone up as high as 30%. We forced this government to double the GST rebate in the past year. We need that to happen again. Will the government do that in the upcoming budget to give people some hope?
Hear, hear.
The Honourable Minister of Housing.
Mr. Speaker, we're the government that has introduced a groundbreaking Canada Housing benefit that is delivering an almost $2,500 to vulnerable renters across the country. And then in partnership with the members of the party opposite, we introduced a top-up to the Canada Housing benefit of $500 that is going to almost 2 million vulnerable Canadian renters. So on this side of the House, Mr. Speaker, we will always have the back of Canadian renters.
The Honourable Member for Burnaby South.
I know it's difficult because we forced the government to do so many things. I was talking about the GST rebate that we forced the government to do, not just the rental subsidy that we forced the government to do.
The reality is that the cost of living is rising. It's becoming increasingly difficult to make ends meet. And in tough times, it is the government's responsibility to help people. We forced the government to double the GST tax credit. Will the government double the tax credit again in the next budget in order to give hope to people who are really struggling because of the cost of living? The Honourable Tourism Minister. Mr. Speaker, I acknowledge the NDP's leaders' work with us, together with us, to double the tax credit, the GST tax credit, and also work in this House for the $500 Canada Housing Benefit top-up. But the member knows that I won't comment on the upcoming budget. He should know, and this House should know, that we are here to support all Canadians and to build a strong economy that works for everyone.
After 8 years, this Liberal Prime Minister is scaring newcomers away. When they're not stuck in this Liberal-made immigration backlog mess, 1 in 5 are saying that they're already planning on leaving. And the number one cost, according to a new poll, is the high cost of living. This Liberal inflation is driving up the cost of everything, and they'll make things even worse for newcomers when they triple their failed carbon tax. When will they show some compassion and axe the failed carbon tax so newcomers actually want to stay and stop forcing them to leave and keep the heat on?
The Honourable Minister of the Environment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Dreams do come true. In March of 2022, the member for New Brunswick Southwest said, and I quote, the federal backstop will kick in and checks will begin to roll out to New Brunswick. Well, today, Mr. Speaker, Premier Higgs of New Brunswick decided to go with the federal plan on carbon pricing, and because, I quote, we need to make a choice that is in the best interest of New Brunswickers. We agree with Premier Higgs, Mr. Speaker. Thank you very much.
The Honourable Member for Calgary, Forest Lawn.
The minister continues to peddle misinformation. His own budget watchdog proves that Canadians get less in their pocket than what they have to pay for this failed carbon tax. He's missed every single emission reductions target that he set for himself, and emissions have gone up. That sounds like a failed tax plan to me. When will he stop with the misinformation, stop the virtue signaling, cancel the AXA failed carbon tax so Canadians can keep the heat on?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I've been Minister of the Environment and Climate Change for a year, and emissions are down 9% below 2005 levels, Mr. Speaker. Let's keep going. If I may, Mr. Speaker, quote again the Premier of New Brunswick, Premier Higgs, talking about...
You look like you're about to stand.
That seemed to have worked. Honourable Member for the Minister for the Environment. From the top, please.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I was saying, I've been Minister of the Environment and Climate Change for a year, and our emissions are down 9% below 2005 levels, Mr. Speaker. Let's keep going. I will quote again the Premier of New Brunswick, Premier Higgs, who decided to go with the federal pricing system. And again, I quote, what this does right is provide relief for inflation. We can fight climate change and support Canadians. We agree with the Premier of New Brunswick, Mr. Speaker. Thank you very much.
The Honourable Member for Lethbridge.
After 8 years of this Liberal government, life is so expensive that Canadians, 20% of them, are skipping meals in order to make ends meet. And it's about to get even worse because this Liberal government is about to triple the carbon tax. So will the Prime Minister do the right thing, axe the tax, or at least get out of the way so that we can fix what he broke?
The Honourable Minister for... No, do you want to come
critically important issue for Canadians across from coast to coast to coast. It is fundamentally why we have rolled out a number of programs to try to ensure those that are most vulnerable. It is exactly why the price on pollution is refunded so that 8 out of 10 Canadian families, particularly those who actually live on modest incomes, receive more money than they actually pay in terms of the price on pollution. They keep quoting the PBO report, and I would just invite them to actually read it.
The Honourable Member for Lethbridge.
What I find interesting is that the members opposite continuously, when they're asked about the carbon tax, talk about the incentives that are being given out in a monetary fashion from the government, but they're not able to talk about any difference that is being made with regards to the environment. After 8 years of this Liberal Prime Minister, Canadians can no longer afford to eat or heat or house themselves. Life is expensive. Canadians are feeling the pain. A Conservative government will keep the heat on and take the tax off. Will the Prime Minister do the same?
The Honourable Minister of the Environment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So I'll say it a third time in this House today. Emissions pollution has gone down below 2005 levels by 9%. By 9%, Mr. Speaker. Methane emissions level in the oil and gas sector are down almost 40% under our watch, and sales of electric vehicles...
I'm going to have to interrupt again. I'm having a hard time hearing the answer. Please continue.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So I'll say it for a third time today in this House. Emissions pollution under our watch is down 9% below 2005 levels, on our way to reducing them by at least 40% by 2030. Methane emissions are down in the oil and gas sector. Sales of...
For Dufferin Caledon.
This minister has some nerve to quote a 9% reduction. What he doesn't tell Canadians is that the economy contracted by 5% at the same time. So, if this is their plan to reach a 45% reduction, that means the economy has to contract 25%. When they tell you who they are, Mr. Speaker, believe them. That's their plan for the economy. When will they admit this disastrous program is only hurting Canadians?
The Honourable Minister of Tourism.
Speaker, there's nothing so devastating for a Conservative for the facts to get in the way of a good economic reality. Mr. Speaker, 150,000 jobs in January alone, 326,000 new jobs since September, the lowest GDP ratio in the world. Mr. Speaker, we're on path to grow this economy. They don't want to help Canadians. We do. That's our plan. We've got one. We're going to deliver.
The honourable member for Dufferin-Caledon.
When you've absolutely lost the argument, Mr. Speaker, you try and change the channel. So let's get back to the channel. 35% of Canadians right now, after 8 years of this Liberal government, say they find it hard to make ends meet every single month. 25% of Canadians say if they get an expense of $500, they can't pay it. That's 8 years of this government. It is pushing Canadians to bankruptcy. When will they admit that's what they're doing? And if they won't fix it, get out of the way, because I'll tell you, we will.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, it seems that my colleagues across the way have amnesia when they were cutting checks for millionaires instead of helping Canadian families.
Exactly.
That's why we introduced in 2016 the CCB. The CCB has helped over 3.5 million families in this country, 6 million children. 435,000 children lifted out of poverty, Mr. Speaker. When these Conservatives are busy cutting, we're making sure Canadians' families' needs are being met. Mr. Speaker, they have a lot to learn.
The Honourable Member for La Pointe-de-l'Île. Mr. Speaker, in an open letter to Quebecers, the member for Westmount wrote that Canada is an Anglophone country. Now, he may have modified his letter after being criticized, but I think he wrote what he truly thinks. For the member for Westmount to defend the Charter of the French language is to attack the Anglophone community, which speaks Canada's only official language. Will the minister remind the member that there is only one official language under threat in Canada, and that is French? The Honourable Minister for Official Languages. Mr. Speaker, I'm going to say this very clearly. We're the first government to declare and recognize French as a second language and as official language, and our bill is very ambitious. I come from New Brunswick, where the French community is in a minority situation, and I understand the importance of protecting French everywhere in Canada, including in Quebec, but we also need to protect all official language minority communities. I've been working with stakeholders everywhere in the country, and I'm very excited for C13 because C13 is going to make a real difference in the lives of Canadians. The Honourable Member for La Pointe-de-l'Île. Mr. Speaker, there are Canadian interests, then there are Quebec interests, and then it seems that there are West Island interests. And for the cast of the West Island story, that's all that matters. They're ready to sacrifice Canada's Francophone and Acadian minorities. They refuse to protect French in Quebec because there's only one thing that matters to them, the interests of the West Island. Can the minister confirm to us that all members of the Liberal caucus will vote in favor of the Liberal bill? The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, let's be clear. My priority as Minister of Official Languages is to ensure that we do absolutely everything possible to protect French everywhere in Canada, including in Quebec. But we also have a responsibility to protect official language minority communities, all of them. We want to do everything. We will do everything. We're ensuring that we address the decline of French, and we hope that C13 will eventually pass because it will make a real difference. Stakeholders and partners are very excited. They want to see the bill pass, and I hope it'll pass swiftly. The Honourable Member for Longueuil-Saint-Hubert. Mr. Speaker, get this. The West Island CEUS, Integrated University Health and Social Services Centre, had to do a media campaign to set the records straight because of the falsehoods being spread by the member for Saint Laurent. False statements made about Bill 96, about the Charter of the French language. In Quebec, a Francophone can receive care in French, an Anglophone can receive care in English. And in Quebec, even an allophone patient will receive services in his or her language, even if the services of interpreters are needed, because we care. So, will the minister call the member for Saint Laurent to order and require an apology? The Honourable Heritage Minister. Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, they do care, yes, but do they have good judgment? I'm not so sure. Now, the Bloc, I don't know how much they really care about French because they just had an entire opposition day during which they could have brought topics about the environment or even about French. But no, that's not what they chose for their opposition day. They decided that they wanted to talk about the Constitution. That's what they chose. That was their choice. But here on this side of the House, we're working truly for all Canadians and all Quebecers.
Crowfoot.
Mr. Speaker, the Liberals have finally admitted failure. We all know that their carbon tax is not an environmental plan, but simply a tax plan. But today, they've admitted that their real plan, and the only way that they've been able to reduce emissions, was because of COVID. Mr. Speaker, the Liberals' carbon tax will cost farmers up to $150,000 a year. That cost is crippling to a family farm. Mr. Speaker, it's been 8 years. For the sake of Canada's farmers and all Canadians, will those Liberals finally axe the tax?
The Honourable Minister of Agriculture.
Mr. Speaker, this is complete disinformation, and this is irresponsible to increase the anxiety of farmers when they are the first one to be impacted by the climate change.
Okay, the Honourable Minister, from the top so we can hear the full answer, please.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think my colleague is sharing disinformation. This is totally false. They are twisting the facts of a certain study. They are not saying the full information. It is misinformed, and it is increasing the anxiety of farmers, and I think it is totally irresponsible.
I just want to bring up that we can't accuse someone of, well, I'm not going to say anything. I'm not going to say the word because everybody knows what was it. And I just want to ask all the members, including the ministers, to be very judicious with their words when they're in the House. The Honourable Member for Northumberland, Peterborough South. The Honourable Member for Northumberland, Peterborough South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We heard today from the Governor of the Bank of Canada that after 8 years of this Liberal Prime Minister, that inflation continues to be a concern and that interest rates will stay high for the foreseeable future. Despite the fact that Canadians are continuing to struggle just to heat their homes and to feed their families, on April 1st, this Liberal government will increase their inflationary carbon tax. Will the Prime Minister finally axe this tax, or at least get out of the way so Conservatives can?
The Honourable Minister for Natural Resources.
Mr. Speaker, as I've said many times in this House, it would be enormously important for Canada if we actually had an official opposition that believed in the reality of climate change and understood that we actually had to have a plan to address climate change like our American friends, like our British friends, like our German friends, like our French friends, in a manner that will promote economic growth and opportunity in every region of this country. We are working to do exactly that to ensure we leave a sustainable planet, one that is prosperous for our kids.
Yes.
The Honourable Member for Northumberland, Peterborough South.
Well, when you're losing the argument, you distract and you deflect. The truth of the matter is that these Liberals are as incompetent at fighting climate change as they are the affordability crisis. These Liberals do not have an environmental plan, they have a tax plan. Exactly. I was there at Public Accounts when the Environmental Commissioner scolded these Liberals for not hitting one single target. Will these Liberals finally get out of the way so that Conservatives can fight climate change and bring prosperity back to our country?
The Honourable Minister of the Natural Resources.
When this government government came to power in 2015, we inherited a target from the Harper Conservatives, which was 30% below 2005 by 2030. The problem with the Harper approach is there was no plan to achieve that target. We put together the most comprehensive climate plan that Canada's ever had. We built a plan that actually not only met, but would exceed that target. And what did we do after that? We raised the target by 50% to make it science-aligned, to ensure that we are actually fighting climate change and doing so in a manner that will leave a prosperous and a healthy environment for our children.
The honourable member for Nunavut.
Rural and remote Indigenous communities are in dire need of housing. Nunavut are living in canvas tents in the winter, sleeping in shifts in overcrowded rooms, and waiting years for adequate housing. The government of Nunavut and Nunavut Tungavik together have asked for $500 million over 3 years starting in the upcoming budget. Will this government properly invest in Nunavut housing so Northerners can sleep in safe, comfortable homes?
Hear, hear.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank the honourable member for an important question. The lack of safe, quality housing across the North is unacceptable, which is why our government is making historic investments in collaboration with partners. Our government has been clear we will not impose solutions on Northerners. Instead, we will work with them to support their priorities. Through Northern Affairs alone, we are investing $200 million, Mr. Speaker, to support housing and related infrastructure in the North. This flexible funding allows territorial partners to continue to advance their most pressing housing needs. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Edmonton Griesbach.
Mr. Speaker, that answer wasn't the one expected by the member of Nunavut. The member of Nunavut asked for $500 million. 200 is not even close. And in my writing, it's no better. It's Edmonton Griesbach's worst problem. We have Indigenous people who are living on the streets, who are enduring the housing crisis, let down by this Prime Minister and let down by the Premier of Alberta. Too many are paying more that they can't afford. They're living in overcrowded homes and they have no homes at all. When will this government stop the rhetoric and start investing in Indigenous housing for Indigenous, by Indigenous, now?
The Honourable Minister of Housing.
Mr. Speaker, we do believe in a for Indigenous, by Indigenous-led urban, rural, and northern Indigenous housing strategy. That is why Budget 2022 included $4 billion additional dollars, over $4 billion to close the gap in Indigenous housing. It included $300 million as an initial investment on a dedicated urban, rural, and northern Indigenous housing strategy informed by a for Indigenous, by Indigenous approach. And that is the beginning of the process, and we'll continue to invest to close that gap, Mr. Speaker.
L'honorable député.
The honourable member for Bourassa. Mr. Speaker, ever since George Floyd was murdered, our government has announced various measures to combat systemic racism. We know that black people are overrepresented in prisons. Yesterday, the Minister of Justice announced the steering group for Canada's Black Justice Strategy. Can you tell us more about that? Thank you. The Honourable Minister of Justice. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank my friend, the member for Bourassa, for his question and participating in our announcement yesterday. Mr. Speaker, the reality is that black people are overrepresented in our justice system, both as victims and as accused. Therefore, we have created a steering group of 9 black experts who understand the situation and have lived experience. They face systemic discrimination, and our response needs to be ambitious, global, and equitable. The Honourable Member for Louise Saint-Laurent. Mr. Speaker, 10 months ago, the Bloc Québécois Liberal Alliance has led to Quebec being treated with contempt when it comes to the CRTC legislation. 10 months ago, Quebec asked to have a seat at the table, but the Bloc Québécois and Liberals stood against that. Due to the complicity of the Bloc Québécois, nothing has been done, despite what the National Assembly of Quebec is asking. Time is going by. We need to listen to Quebec. Will the Liberal Bloc finally understand that we need to strike a parliamentary committee to listen to Quebec's requests? The Honourable Minister of Canadian Heritage. Mr. Speaker, the bill was tabled more than a year ago. There have been a great many witnesses and meetings both in the House and the Senate, hundreds of hours of study, and now my colleague is finally sitting up and taking notice 1 year later, Mr. Speaker? He's basically doing even more to not pay any attention than Sleeping Beauty. Well, Mr. Speaker, if the leader of the Liberal Bloc Party, if he thinks that it's taking too long, perhaps we could remind him that his government triggered a useless election, which has caused delays. Even at the time, the Bloc Québécois wasn't interested in doing anything. So once again, will this Bloc Québécois Liberal minister rise in this House and commit to hearing from Quebec at a parliamentary committee, as it should be? The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, we all know the expression asleep at the switch, but my colleague is taking that to the next level. In fact, right next to the dictionary definition of that expression, you'd see a photo of the Conservative caucus. This bill is a good bill. It's being examined by the Senate and the House. Media sectors approve of it. I'm glad the Conservative Party is suddenly waking up and taking notice of this, but they've been asleep this whole time. The Honourable Member, if the leader of the Liberal Bloc Québécois Alliance has anything to say about caucuses, well, I would say that he should look within his own caucus, because perhaps not everyone will be present for that picture. The minister likes fighting with the Bloc Québécois, but actually the Bloc Québécois prefers to complain than actually defend Quebec. Will the minister agree to meet with Quebec at the parliamentary committee in order to agree on this bill? The Honourable Minister. Well, it is precisely in the interests of Quebec that the Liberal Party and the Bloc Québécois are working. This is like a groundhog that's finally getting up after a winter. Oh, I had such a great sleep. I'm so relaxed. And while the groundhog was drowsing in its cozy burrow, things were moving along. We have a good bill, we're doing the right thing, and we'll do that without the Conservatives, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Member for Lévis-Lobinière. Mr. Speaker, the National Assembly of Quebec is asking for changes on Bill C-11 and C-5. The Ministers of Heritage and Justice have been called upon. Both of these pieces of legislation are supported by the Bloc Québécois Liberal Alliance, and they go against what the government of Quebec wants. Mr. Speaker, we have 2 Quebec ministers. They have been shamefully supported by the Bloc Québécois. Will they refuse the help requested by Quebec and in so doing disavow the Quebec nation? The Honourable Minister of Heritage. Mr. Speaker, I'm glad that my colleague didn't yell too loud, because he might have woken up his group of sleeping groundhogs. They've been there for a year while we've been debating. They've been sleeping in the Senate. They've been sleeping in the House of Commons. We are working for the music industry. We are working for the TV sector, and meanwhile they are drowsing. The Honourable Member for Rivière-du-Nord. Mr. Speaker, the National Assembly is worried about suspended sentences that C-5 has made possible for some violent crime like sexual assault. And C-5 is making it possible for abuses to occur. The Bloc Québécois would like to underscore the compromise we proposed when C-5 was studied, when the Federalist Conservative Liberal Bloc rejected that. Our compromise reestablished minimum sentences for armed crime and prohibit suspended sentences for sexual assault, while allowing judges to exceptionally override that. It's the right balance. Will the minister consider that compromise and listen to Quebec? The Honourable Minister of Justice. Mr. Speaker, serious crimes always deserve serious consequences, and with C-5, we left behind certain policies that were not working for our justice system and in our prisons, and we are fighting systemic racism. The Bloc Québécois voted for Bill C-5 because they know that minimum sentences do not work. As a government, Mr. Speaker, we are working hard to ensure appropriate consequences for sexual assault. We have brought forward legislation and programs to strengthen support to victims. We will continue to do so. The Honourable Member for Rivière-du-Nord. Mr. Speaker, in the media, we saw that 4 victims' advocacy groups share Quebec's concerns. We should not ignore them. The minister has the right to make mistakes, but he should admit them. At one point, everyone seemed open to the Bloc Québécois compromise, including committee experts. We will be tabling a bill to re-establish minimum sentences for firearms offenses, and that would prohibit suspended sentences for sexual assault while allowing courts to override that if they have the right justification. Can we count on the Minister of Justice to show some open-mindedness? Not him, not him. He always likes to yell. I'd like to hear from the Minister of Justice. The Honourable Minister of Justice. Mr. Speaker, the goal of C5 was to combat systemic racism in the justice system and do something about the overrepresentation of Black and Indigenous people in the justice system. Yesterday, we announced a new steering group for Canada's Black Justice Strategy, and I heard from people who have lived experience of systemic racism. We will continue to fight racism, and Bill C5 is part of that.
For Calgary Midnapore.
Mr. Speaker, after 8 years of this Liberal government, high-priced consultants at McKinsey & Company have never had it so good. They're setting immigration policy, they're setting immigration targets. Public servants are admitting this. It is reported in the CBC. Even Bill Morneau, in his book, admitted that McKinsey is setting immigration policy. But you know who isn't admitting to that, Mr. Speaker? The Minister of Immigration himself. So, Mr. Speaker, who's telling the truth?
A good question.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Immigration.
Mr. Speaker, I certainly hope that they actually listen to the Minister of Immigration's appearance in the committee. And I will quote I'll repeat actually, Mr. Speaker. The Minister was very clear that he has not met with McKinsey or had any influence by them. But if they want to listen to someone, let's quote someone, Mr. Speaker. And I would invite them to listen to their former Conservative leader, John Reynolds. And I'll quote, he said, the attacks levied against him, Dominic Barton, by the Conservative Party I once led are baseless. Mr. Speaker, let's make sure they start listening and acting.
The Honourable Member for Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands and Rideau Lakes.
Well, after 8 years of this Liberal Prime Minister, it's hard for Canadians not to be disappointed when every day there is a news story about a Liberal breaking the law. Well, Canadians are struggling to feed their families and keep the heat on at home. Liberals are lining the pockets of their friends, like the Trade Minister did, like the Housing Minister did, like the Intergovernmental Affairs Minister did, and like the Prime Minister did. Tens of thousands of dollars to their well-connected friends. So will this Liberal Prime Minister take responsibility for the law-breaking in his Liberal government benches, or will he get out of the way so we can fix what they've broken?
The Honourable Government House Leader.
The party opposite, the Conservatives, had on a number of occasions now said, get out of the way so that they can step in. I think they're missing our democratic process. They have to face an election, and they faced a number of elections where their policies were rejected. And maybe they should reflect, Mr. Speaker, on why their policies were rejected. When they undercut all over the world our efforts to deal with climate change, and they were seen as an agent to destroy action on climate change in the world, where they refused to take action to improve Canada's employment situation or on child care, or now they're refusing to vote on dental care. Mr. Speaker, they're good on rhetoric, not on action.
Member for Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands and Rideau Lakes.
Let's talk about action. 1.5 million Canadians using food banks in a single month. Mortgages going up to more than $3,000 per month. Rent doubling to more than $2,000 per month. 20% of Canadians skipping meals every day because they can't afford them. No government has ever spent so much to achieve so little, unless you're a well-connected Liberal insider, and then it's tens of thousands of dollars from these Liberal lawbreakers. Is today the day this Liberal Prime Minister will finally take responsibility for the lawbreaking in his government?
The Honourable Minister of Tourism.
Let's dial the tape back. 10 years of economic stagnation under the Harper Conservatives. Not a year over 1% of growth. Mr. Speaker, 2.7 million people lived out of poverty since we've been on this side. Mr. Speaker, 2 million more Canadians working. What do the Conservatives have, Mr. Speaker? Nada. Zip. Zilch. No plan on climate change. No plan on affordability. No plan to grow the economy. We have a plan. We're delivering it. All they have is buzzwords and nonsense economics.
The Honourable Member for Pontiac. Mr. Speaker, post-secondary education for official language minority communities throughout the country is very important for our government. In Francophone communities, there are many needs. There's the labor shortage. There are all sorts of challenges. We need more Francophone and bilingual teachers, for example. Could the Minister of Official Languages tell this House about what she's doing to support post-secondary institutions, Francophone post-secondary institutions? The Honourable Minister of Official Languages. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank my colleague for her question and hard work. Yesterday, I was at the University of Ottawa with the President of the Treasury Board to announce a $20.4 million federal contribution to support Francophone programs at the university. That funding will be used to develop new classes entirely in French and in order to hire STEM professors. It will also be used to create a center of excellence for French language education. That's another example of how our government is supporting official language minority communities. Thank you.
After 8 years of this Liberal Prime Minister's inflationary policies, seniors can't afford food. Barry told me 40 out of 120 attendees at the mission he works at were seniors. People that used to donate to food banks are having to go to one because they can't afford groceries. Will this Prime Minister take responsibility for seniors going without food, or will they get out of the way so Conservatives can fix what they have broken and restore seniors' dignity?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary, Minister of Seniors.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. We recognize the challenge that seniors are facing, and our government has been there for them from day one. While the party opposite, Mr. Speaker, has had nothing for seniors in any of their campaign platforms. Our government is helping seniors who are struggling by doubling the GST tax credit, providing dental and rental support. We're increasing the OAS for seniors over 75. Mr. Speaker, we'll take no lessons from that party on this side of the House.
The Honourable Member for Regina Wascana.
Mr. Speaker, after 8 years of this Liberal Prime Minister, everything in this Liberal government is broken. The Passport Office can't issue passports, the Immigration Office can't approve permanent residencies, and now Transport Canada is experiencing delays of up to 8 months to approve applications for commercial pilot licenses. This is after the pilots have completed all of the training requirements. Terrible. Mr. Speaker, what did the Liberals break this time to cause these delays at Transport Canada?
Good question. The Honourable Minister of Transport.
Mr. Speaker, our top priority is ensuring that aircrew meet all necessary medical requirements so that they can do their job safely. There have been delays beyond our service standard due to unprecedented circumstances of COVID-19 that have impacted the global air sector. Transport Canada has put in place changes to processing and assessment of files to improve the efficiency of the review process. Transport Canada is in the process of hiring additional staff to speed up the processing of medical certificates. Mr. Speaker, we're on the job. The Conservatives want to forget about COVID.
Member for Regina Wascana.
Mr. Speaker, Canadians want to travel again. Airlines want to offer new routes and hire new pilots. Unfortunately, the problem seems to be this Liberal government and the 8-month backlog at Transport Canada in issuing commercial pilots licenses. This is a process that took only 2 months until just recently. Mr. Speaker, why don't the Liberals just move out of the way so Conservatives can get air travel moving again?
Yeah. The Honourable Minister of Transport.
Mr. Speaker, the Conservatives first blamed vaccine mandates. Second, they blamed ArriveCan. Third, they blamed testing at airports. The Conservatives have no idea what they're talking about, Mr. Speaker. They're ambulance chasers. However, Mr. Speaker...
Are we ready now? Okay. The Honourable Minister, please continue.
Mr. Speaker, COVID-19 has had a massive impact on the air sector, and our government has been there to support the workers and Canadians. Yes, there have been several disruptions, Mr. Speaker. Our government is on top of this. I've been speaking to Transport Canada on hiring more resources. We are fixing this issue, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
Honourable Member for Halifax West.
Mr. Speaker, many of us have heard of heartbreaking stories of people wrongfully convicted who spent many years behind bars for a crime they did not commit. In my own province, one needs only to think of the Glen Assoon case. When this happens, it ruins the life not only of the convicted person, his family, community, but it also erodes public trust in our justice system. Can the Minister of Justice please provide this House with an overview of how the bill he tabled today will improve the system currently in place to review cases of wrongful conviction?
Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. First of all, I want to thank Susan Milgaard and James Lockyer, both of whom joined me in the press conference today. Susan is the sister of David Milgaard and the daughter of Joyce, after whom the bill is named. Mr. Speaker, C-40 creates a miscarriage of justice review commission to examine wrongful convictions fairly and efficiently.
I'm afraid we're out of time, and I just want to remind the honourable members that ministers and individual members cannot refer to people in the gallery. The honourable member for Winnipeg Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last week, we learned that the Liberals spent just 5% of $724.1 million violence prevention strategy announced in fall 2020 to address violence against Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit people. Not one new shelter or transitional home has been built. Unacceptable. This delay is costing lives. We should not have to beg for our safety. Then the public wants to know why so little of this money has been spent. When will this government get this money out the door?
The Honourable Minister for Housing.
Mr. Speaker, I really agree with the Honourable Member. The importance of this $742 million fund to develop a comprehensive violence prevention strategy. This includes $420 million over 5 years to support the construction of a minimum 38 shelters and 50 transitional homes. We understand the urgency of this matter. CMHC has already selected 22 projects to move forward, and we expect concrete announcements in the next few weeks.
The Honourable Member for Spadina, Fort York.
Mr. Speaker, yesterday I held a town hall on community safety. I thank police officers of 14th Division for attending. Honourable members may recall a man being swarmed and killed by 8 female assailants. This happened across the street from my constituency office. Parents of children at Jean Lum Public School were threatened for speaking out about their kids being targets of illegal cannabis shops. One even set up shop next to 2 schools. Public transit's becoming a war zone. A woman was knifed on the Spadina streetcar. This is the new normal my constituents must accept. Mr. Speaker, the government legalized cannabis. It can't just walk away. Urban centers require urban solutions. Will the Minister of Public Safety commit to creating an urban public safety strategy?
Minister for Public Safety.
Mr. Speaker, I share my honourable colleague's concern, which is one of the reasons why we partnered directly with the City of Toronto in the form of an announcement of $12 million to address many of the social determinants that he mentioned in his question. What this means is that local organizations will have a greater capacity to offer mental health services that can help to address substance issues, that will provide them with the additional capacity to help people who are at risk, especially young people who need more training when it comes to schooling and careers. We will continue to work very closely with the City of Toronto and municipalities across the country so that we can stop crime before it starts. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
We have a number of points of order, but before we go to them, I wish to draw the attention of members to the presence in the gallery of His Excellency André Gil, Speaker of the Senate of the Kingdom of Spain. We have a couple of points of order. The Honourable Member for Calgary-Shepherd.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So coming out of question period, the Minister of Agriculture and Agri-Food during question period accused a member on our side of the House of deliberately engaging in disinformation. So from the Oxford Reference Dictionary, it says dissemination of false information with the deliberate intent to deceive or mislead. Mr. Speaker, I'm asking from you for just two simple things. There are terms in this House that are unparliamentary terms under any circumstances. So I wonder if you could take it back and make a ruling in the future on whether the term disinformation, when speaking of the terms used by a member, is still parliamentary in this House. And a second matter, to have the Minister retract her statement.
I want to thank the Honourable Member for his point of order, and I will look into it further. The Honourable Minister of Agriculture.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. No problem. I'll withdraw the remark, and I'd invite my colleague to share the full quote. I have a different version than his, so I'd like to compare our notes. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Okanagan, Similkameen Nicola.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In today's QP proceedings, I think you'll find that the Minister of Transport used the term ambulance chasers. I would remind the Minister and this government that we're all honourable members, and I do think, Mr. Chair, that you should rule on whether or not the use of such terms towards another member is parliamentary.
I will look into that, but let me talk first, and I'll go to the other points of order. If I can have your attention, we're picking different words, and one of the things that I want to see is more judicious use of words in this House on all sides, during the questions and during the answers. If we're going to start picking words apart, we could be here, and it could be a long process, not only for me, but for every one of you who bring a word that is questionable. So please, be judicious on your use of words. Thank you, the Honourable Member for North Okanagan, or Okanagan, Similkameen Nicola. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader is rising.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. During question period, you made reference after the Minister of Justice had made his comments, and in nowhere in his comments did he make reference to Susan Milgaard being in the gallery. In fact, Mr. Speaker, I stood to applaud when I had witnessed seeing her there. The Minister did not make reference to...
No, I think we're getting into debate, but what happened is you cannot do indirectly what you can't do directly. And let me finish. And when someone starts speaking, we have a rule that 35 seconds, whether it's during clapping or a statement. I had to stop it after 35 seconds. Unless the House decides to change the rules, I have to stick by those agreements that have been made and implemented over time. So there was two things there. One was doing it indirectly, and everybody was clearly looking up and clapping, and it took up the time. Unfortunately, that's how it worked out. Any other points of order? Oh, the Honourable Member for Sandwich Gulf Islands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wouldn't want to belabor the point, but I would want to have guidance for my own conduct in this place. I agree with the Honourable Parliamentary Secretary that the Minister didn't reference anyone in the gallery. I agree that time taken up in applause does cut into speaking time. So I would find it difficult if someone well-known is in the gallery and we reference that they were earlier in the day at a press conference, if that violated our rules. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
It is. Any other points of order? Okay, very good. Thursday question, the Honourable Opposition House Leader has a question.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I was wondering if the government House Leader could update members as to the business for the rest of this week, and as members of Parliament go off and enjoy Family Day in many parts of the country with their loved ones, and also get back to work in their constituents when we return after those constituency work weeks, if the government House Leader could update the House as to what we can expect in terms of legislation. And while I'm on my feet, Mr. Speaker, just because his own colleague asked members of the Conservative Party to read the Parliamentary Budget Officer's report, I was wondering if he would allow me to table the report, especially the part that says that most households will see a net loss resulting from federal carbon pricing under the Liberals' plan. Do I have unanimous consent to table the Parliamentary?
All those opposed to the honourable member moving the motion will please say